Well, it's that time again. It's time to talk about how our housing market is performing here in the Phoenix area. And I ultimately make these to help you make decisions on what you're going to do with real estate. Is it a good time for you to buy? Is it a good time for you to sell? Or if you're buying and selling, what should your strategies be while you are in the market right now? And so I'm going to break it down by mostly data-driven things. So we're going to talk about supply, we're going to talk about interest rate, we're going to talk about demand, and at the end I'll also talk about an in-the-field experience of what it's actually looking like from a hands-on feel for what it's looking like in the field. So how are buyers acting, what type of offers are getting accepted, how are sellers feeling in this market. So I want to give you an honest opinion today to break down our housing market here in Arizona. So without further ado, let's get into it. And we'll first talk about the supply here. This is kind of the hot topic in the real estate market right now. Supply is up. We are at about 26,000 homes for sale here in the greater Phoenix area. This is actually extending out. It also includes some of Flagstaff all the way down to some of Tucson as well. So this is almost all of Arizona, but not to a full picture, but mostly looking at Maricopa County with some outskirts kind of being included in this total scale. So let's talk about inventory. Supply is going to be our first stop here, and this is really the driving factor. This is the hot topic in the real estate market because inventory is up right now, and it is quite high even compared to pre-pandemic levels. Inventory is high. We are at about 26,000 homes for sale, and that's up 40% from this time last year. So that's a big jump, right? We went from about 16,000 this time last year all the way up to 26,000. That is a big jump. We are seeing inventory rise. And at the end of the day, if we have too much inventory and not enough buyers, well, those sellers are going to have to lower their price to get to where these buyers are trying to pay. So inventory going up is a big deal. And at the end of the day, if you're just simply tracking a few things in the market, I'd be looking at inventory and I'd be looking at homes closed. If you look at those two things, you'll have a really good idea of how the market is performing. And we are seeing that inventory is high right now. And the question is, why is inventory high? Why are more sellers putting their home on the market? And in general, there's just a few things that everyone is going to need to sell for some reason in time, right? There's going to be a baseline amount of sellers, right? These are people that are relocating for jobs, they're relocating for family, maybe they just want to move to another state. There's kind of this baseline reason that people are moving that's always going to have some kind of constant turnover, right? There's always going to be a certain amount of home selling because there's always going to be people that have these needs for a reason to sell. But then there's another bucket of sellers, and there's kind of twofold bucket of sellers in this next section. So you have the baseline, and then you have the two that are not a part of the baseline. And I would say this is distressed sellers, and this is sellers that want to sell. And so people that don't have to, right, they don't have to move because they're relocating for a job or something happened to family and they're relocating, those are the baseline. But then there's the distressed sellers, and these are the ones that actually determine if our market is going to drop high in price. And a distressed seller is someone that needs to sell, right? Maybe they're not paying their mortgage, they can't afford it, and they're getting foreclosed on. Maybe they lost their job, and so they can no longer make their payments, and they're trying to quick sell it. There's obviously quite a few reasons that people can be distressed sell, but at the end of the day, it usually comes down to how safe their job situation is, and also if they're making bad decisions with their money could also play a factor into it. And distressed sellers greatly cause our market to drop in price, and that's because they have to sell. So if they're on the market and they're getting to that point where they're about to be foreclosed on, or they have to sell because they need the cash, or they need to stop paying their mortgage, they are going to be willing to take a lower price on their home sale because they're in need to sell, right? That just makes sense, right? They're listed at $400,000, they get an offer at $350,000, they might not want to risk it, they're going to sell quickly. And so you can see why that would drop prices, right? If they have to sell and a buyer doesn't have to buy, well, the buyer is going to negotiate down to get that seller to come to a lower price because they realize they are distressed. Where on the other hand, when we look at sellers that want to sell, these are people who are probably upsizing, or they're downsizing. They're an older couple looking to sell into a smaller home, or they're looking to take out the profit they made from their home, maybe not put as much into their next home, or maybe just keep it and spend it all on vacations and cars. Who knows? But there are people who want to sell. And in reality, our current market has a lot of people that want to sell, and we have very few people that are actually distressed sellers right now. There are currently 17 foreclosures listed on Zillow, and in the last 365 days, we had just 165 REO sales here in the Phoenix area. So that is about 0.5 per day are actually selling here in Phoenix in terms of distressed sellers that are getting foreclosed on. Now, of course, there can also be distressed sellers who are on the market regularly, and maybe they're just taking a lower profit without being labeled as an REO or labeled as a pre-foreclosure. Those are, of course, things that can happen. But in reality, foreclosures are not something you are seeing on a regular basis. 17 for sale is extremely minimal across history here in the Phoenix area. There are not many foreclosures happening. There are a few reasons for that. Of course, banks have offered quite a bit of relief for foreclosures, especially since COVID. But in general, people are also not needing to be foreclosed on because they have so much equity in their house that they can sell it before they need to. So in reality, we're not seeing these super distressed sellers. Where we are seeing a lot of these non-distressed sellers that want to sell. They're looking to upsize, take out some of the money from this one, put it towards the next one, or they're looking to downsize. We're seeing quite a bit of those sellers right now. And some of the psychology behind those sellers that want to sell actually shows that they have a positive view on the market. And two reasons. They have a positive view that they're going to sell and get a price that they want to sell at so they can get their money, and a positive enough view to want to probably go move that money into a home that they are buying. So there's kind of a twofold positiveness when a seller that wants to sell puts their home on the market. They are happy enough with the market conditions to sell and also happy enough to buy a home in these market conditions as well. So more sellers that want to sell actually almost show a positive sign on the market, at least in the psychology of people. Whether it's happening or not depends on what happens in the market. But in the psychology of sellers, if they actually want to sell and then use that money to buy, they actually view this as a positive market for both sides of things. And in reality, I do think that the huge bucket of new sellers in our market recently are the people that want to sell. Obviously, we saw there are so few distressed sellers, so few REOs happening, but the people that want to sell is a big number. And the reason I think this is the case is when we go and look at the sales numbers. And this is going to fall into the demand category as we're moving from supply to demand. This shows our demand. Homes are selling 1.25% below the current list price and 3.75% below the original list price. So if they were listed at $500,000 originally, they're going to be selling for about $481,000. But if they're currently listed at $500,000, maybe they started at $515,000 and then dropped to $500,000, they're going to be selling around $493,000. 1.25% below current list price. Now that is a low number. And the reason that I think that most of these people that are now selling are the people that don't need to sell but want to sell is this exact reason. If you needed to sell a home, there would be more negotiating. There are more sellers in the market than there are buyers. So buyers can be fairly picky on which home they want to buy. But they're realizing they're going to these different homes. They're going to go view all the homes that they want to see. They probably picked one that they absolutely love. This is the perfect home for their family. They go to the seller and they try to negotiate down, and the seller says, I don't want to go to $450,000 because I don't need to sell. If I have to go to $450,000, I'll just keep the home and keep living in it or keep renting it out, whatever they want to do with it. And so they don't need to sell, so they're not going to take this low price. Well, then the buyer's going to come back and realize, okay, actually this was our favorite house. We looked at all the houses, they were all around $500,000 and this was our favorite. Maybe let's offer them $490,000 because that's close to what they're looking for. The buyer feels good, they got a little under list price. The seller feels good because they're pretty close to list price. And then we get an agreement. And the reason that I think this is happening is not only what I'm seeing in the field, but also look at the numbers. If sellers were actually distressed, they'd probably take more than 1% off their list price when a buyer comes in. But sellers are taking quite a while to sell right now. 53 days on average it's taking to sell a home here in the Phoenix area, and they are getting just 1.25% under their list price. Basically saying that sellers don't actually have to sell, and if the buyer comes along trying to get a big discount on the home, they're just going to decline it and they're going to say, we'll sit around. We'll wait another month or two until a buyer comes along that actually wants to buy this house. And same thing from original list price, 3.75% is extremely low, especially because sellers almost always overlist their home. They're like, hey, let's just try it at $550 just in case the right buyer comes along, and then they realize no one comes and views it, so then they lower it to $500. And so in reality, 3.75% below the original list price is a great number, showing actually a fairly neutral market. That number actually points towards a seller's market, although in reality we aren't truly in a seller's market. And that 1.25% also shows that this is almost leaning towards a seller's market because of how little buyers are actually getting off the list price. So it's sort of this weird conundrum where buyers definitely have some more power in this market, but sellers are in such a lack of need to sell that they're not taking a big discount on their homes, and they're actually getting really close to list price. And so, like I said, there's quite a few more sellers in this market, but a lot of them fit into this bucket of people that don't need to sell. And I'm seeing this in the first-hand basis as well. Most of my sellers are not in this dire need that they have to sell it in the next month, so let's price it aggressively. I've even had sellers that are like, well, only if we get it for this price do we want to sell. So they'll sit for a year. And that's why you see days on market be so high right now, is there's so many sellers that are saying, well, if we can get a little bit more than it's actually worth, then we'll actually sell it. So we'll just list it on the market, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't, because we've either paid it off or we have so much equity, we're not that worried about waiting much longer to actually get it sold. And based off all the numbers that we're given, we have about the exact same amount of demand we did this time last year. The difference is that we have 44% more listings on the market. So you would assume that prices would be coming down. And yet because of this lack of need of sellers needing to sell, buyers are actually having to come really close to list price. And at the end of the day, that's why sales prices haven't fallen. If we look at this graph, we see for about a year now, prices have basically been right around 450. We dropped to 440, we came up to just above 450, we dropped a little bit in April, but we're back now at 450. In general, prices haven't changed in about a year, and that's because one, sellers are not very distressed, but two, also interest rates haven't really changed in that entire year. They fluctuated a little bit, but in reality, they've been in a fairly tight range. Look at this graph right here. They've basically hovered between 6.5% and 7% this entire time. That 0.5% does matter, but it's not going to drastically change the market. Usually a 1% is really what's going to actually make a change in home prices and demand for buyers that can actually qualify for the home that they are looking for. So when we look at this, there's kind of this weird balance. We have buyers that want to buy, they want to negotiate because they realize there's too many homes for sale. But we have so many sellers that don't actually need to sell that when a buyer ends up finding the home they love, they're going to pay pretty close to list price. And this shows two things. For one, it shows that buyers still want to buy homes and are willing to pay a high price. But it also shows that buyers are fairly well qualified in this market. And I'm seeing that firsthand as well. Most of my buyers are usually people that have sold a house recently, or they have fairly well-paying jobs. So if they've sold a house recently, they're going to have a decent amount of cash to buy the next one. And a lot of them are actually paying cash in itself. About 30% of homes are paying for cash here in the greater Phoenix area. That is a large number. And then there's also another large chunk of buyers that are putting a huge chunk of money down. So they're putting 50% plus down on their purchase. And so when you have these well-qualified buyers, they don't care as much about getting the absolute best deal. What they care about is finding the home that they love. They're probably moving into this home hoping to be there for 20 plus years, and so they're going to be more picky on the home than they are the price. So as we talked about, we have the seller that doesn't need to sell, but we have this buyer that wants their perfect home. So if they go look at 10 homes, one is the home for them and their family. They're super well qualified. They're like, am I really going to lose my perfect home over 10, 20,000? No, they're so well qualified, they're willing to just pay it because that's what the seller's willing to do, and then they get to an agreement and we get to a final transaction. And I'm seeing that quite often in this market. Most of my buyers I'm working with are well qualified. Yes, there are still some first-time buyers out there, and those people do want to do more negotiating, especially when it comes to concessions, as far as money they're getting back from the seller at the end to use towards closing costs or to use towards interest rates. But besides that, most buyers are so well qualified that when they find the perfect home for them, they're going to end up paying pretty close to list price because they're realizing that's the only way the seller is actually going to sell their home. And this understanding has seemed to come into more understanding really in the last 3 months. We've seen this kind of flare up. So if we look at the homes closed stat, which in reality, if you want to know how the market is doing, you could be looking at this homes closed stat and probably get a good idea if the market is a buyer or seller's market as we see numbers tick up or down. And January was low. That's fairly standard just because not a lot of people are buying a house in December, which then they would close in January. Where February was a fairly low number. It's actually about the same as last year, which was an extremely low homes closed number, but March jumped up pretty quickly. April jumped up quite a bit, and surprisingly, the median sale price went down 10,000. And then May followed suit with April being right around 7,000, and median sales price jumped back up. We don't know where the June numbers are going to end, but right now it seems like the median sale price is going to be around 450,000. So we're looking at this, and we're actually seeing homes closed going up quite a bit. We're seeing a jump right now, and so it'll be interesting what happens in the next few months to see if we stay around this 7,000 number, because that's a pretty good number here in the Phoenix area, at least compared to the last couple of years. 7,000 homes closed is a good number for a monthly number, but if we see it dip down into the low sixes again, then that's when we're going to be seeing too much of a gap between the inventory and the homes closed. And we actually see that tends to be where we see prices start to drop a bit is 6,000 and below. We'll see a slight decline, probably another 5,000-10,000 below our median sales price if we get that low in homes closed. But it seems like we're pointing in a somewhat upward trajectory, staying around this 7,000 homes closed number, and that's going to keep our market staying right around this 450 and maybe ticking slightly up as inflation keeps happening. But in reality, we are in a fairly neutral market in the Phoenix area. And it seems like it should be more of a buyer's market than it actually is. But let's say probably 10,000 of those homes for sale are sellers that don't care if they sell unless they get a price pretty close to their list price. That's a big chunk. About half the homes for sale right now are sellers that are so non-distressed that if they don't get their number, they may not sell at all. And that's why the days on market is so high. We have so many sellers that don't need to sell, they're overpricing their home, and they're just sitting around waiting for someone to buy it. Where the people that are actively trying to sell, they're going to be pricing appropriately, and they're going to probably get a buyer within 30 days. If you show well and your home is priced appropriately, right, priced around appraised value, you're going to be likely selling within 30 days. And I'm seeing this with my own listings. The sellers that are pricing appropriately, they are getting multiple showings a week. They are probably getting an offer or two in the first month, and it's just about working with that buyer. So we are in a slightly odd market where buyers should have more an advantage than they actually are in this market, mostly because there's so few sellers that actually are willing to take a discount on their home. So hopefully that makes sense for you. If you're a seller right now, just know you should be pricing appropriately and you are still going to sell. I wouldn't be too scared about inventory because you're competing against a lot less homes than that number actually shows. And if you're a buyer, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're well qualified looking for your perfect home for 20 years, you're probably going to be paying pretty close to list price. But if you're not that situation, or if you're wanting to get a little bit more of a deal, it could be that you're going around and trying to test out which seller is more desperate than another, placing multiple offers, and eventually you will find 1 in 10 that probably are willing to take a bigger discount on their home than the others. But that obviously takes being less picky on the home you're getting and also being willing to wait until you find that right seller. Hopefully this gave you a good idea of our housing market here in the greater Phoenix area. I am a realtor here. If you want help buying or selling here in the Phoenix area, would love to help out. My number and email on the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos about living in Arizona.